The book is brand new, absolutely brand new. We were just discussing over dinner tonight that it came out Monday, and this is my very first public appearance with the book. So much so that I'm so awkward with the whole situation, the whole relationship with the book, that I totally forgot to bring my copy with me, so I had to borrow a copy from Matt, which I very much appreciate. So I'm going to start with a poem that's been anthologized a couple of times out of collection. It's Winter After the Strike. My father was an air traffic controller in 1981, and he was also one of the leaders. I guess he was the president of his local at Newark International when they went on strike. And of course, as many of us in the room remember, it did not go well. In response to the strike, President Reagan fired them all. He said, "Well, we'll start from scratch. It's just the Federal Aviation Administration." So anyway, this poem reflects on that time period in our lives. Winter After the Strike. Perhaps we are each a cresting echo, hesitating, vibrant with the moment before rippling back. But you're steadfast as Odysseus, strapped to the mast, as you were in '81 when Reagan ordered you back to work. You were president of the union local you steered with your working man's voice, the voice that ground the Ptolemaic ballet of air traffic to a temporary stop. You used it to refuse to cross the picket line I walked with you outside Newark International. I could see the dark turnpike for miles, the somber office buildings winking insomniac cells, the tarmac spread before us like a picnic blanket, and you, like a jade Buddha, suffused in the glow of that radial EKG. You'd push the microphone in front of me, nod, and let me give the word. I called all my stars home, trajectories bent on the weight of my voice. You say you miss tracking those leviathans, each one snagged on the barb of your liturgy. I too get reeled in by the hard, now rusty music of your pipes. I follow it back to the day of your accident and the story you tell. You were 16, hurdling the railings, dividing row house porches from one end of Widener Place to the other to impress Mom. I imagine the way you cleared each one like a leaf bobbing on water, catching the penultimate, the rubber toe of your Chuck Taylors kissed by the rail, upsetting your rhythm, and you roiled in the air headlong, arms outstretched, stumbling toward the last like one hell-bent or sick to the stomach. The way you landed, on your throat, the rail could have taken your head clean off. Since then, your voice issues like some wartime communique, a ragged, typewritten dispatch, which you swallow with your smoker's cough, black as a tire spinning in the snow. That winter after the strike, we were so poor you sold everything but the house. Tell me, Dad, when you'd stand at the door calling me in for the night, could you hear me speaking to snowflakes falling beneath the lamppost? Could you hear me out there imitating you, imitating prayer? So there are, in addition to labor on the one side of my family, there are a lot of artists on my mother's side. And I have an aunt who does these miniature scenes in these little, they're not shoe boxes, of course. I remember them from elementary school as the dioramas that we did, you know. But they're rather more sophisticated than that. Anyway, I hope my very unsophisticated perception of them doesn't shade your reception of the poem. The Miniaturist. She is jackhammering needlepoint through a hank of satin blanched in a wash of milk light, the rippling fluorescence, her sculpted hunch snow-capped by the light above the workbench, the ceiling veined with shadow play of plumbing, gurgling like hand-fed pigeons. House shoes drag out her listening, and she thinks of sea foam inching the linoleum's edge, dampening the sill between laundry and garage, where his voice catches like a sweater thread on a cuticle, unsure of loss or longing, before he enters her field of vision to peck her forehead as if it were parchment. And he tells her it is good, and she thinks, comme ci, comme ça, it will do. Everywhere appears the synecdoche projecting from the frugal mind in which she squints at sea swells that broaden like a yawn before they spasm into compressed light, and the idea of light, and the rhythm in between them is the precision she crafts into displays she wants to carry through the vastness that follows the hollow and diminishment of her bones, the rudderless boats and unchartable shores, the buoys doddering silently mid-motion like satellites she seizes fraction by fraction from the lips of stars ever imploding on the unseen roofs of her balsa wood boxes. Not at all, not at all. That's good. Following that theme, another nautical-esque, since sort of homage to the location. This is Dolphin Charter, Cape May, New Jersey. When Helios has dragged his wagon out to sea and slipped gauzily inside the horizon's crisp incision, when we return reserves of crescent fish to the water, sewing dark thumbnails of waves along the evening's auburn furrow, when the chiseled eye and blunted beak remind us both of bronzes at Versailles, when we've forgotten stationary feet and cannot judge our pace or estimate arrival, but in relation to the jargoned architecture around the lamplit estuary, though there are no absolutes except that twirled baton of light, as we flow both with and against the swelling flood, as we flow both with and against the swelling flood, the coastal plate, the falling air, and teeming ether, when carnivals of iridescent skin no longer gallop the divergent wake, when all greetings from the shore have been returned, that neighborly inter-elemental semaphore, when we have thread the inlets to the roadside dock, disembarked, and like the charter's muscled pivot on the gravel lot, made our K-turn, like the charter's muscled pivot made our K-turn in the gravel lot, that's the first time you will yawn all day. As I wheeled and drift in traffic, making like a gondolier rippling through a shared mirage. We'll feel the land expand like lungs and fall, become our own spectators, like some times when we make love, to gauge our ark's departure, watch our vessel drive away the way we'd watch a boat head seaward as it's melting on the delta of its wake. So hard. Once it gets away from you, you're just kind of dragging it back in. Persists. So I wanted to read one for Peter Coviello. I was telling him earlier I did some work on Whitman over the summer, and his book, Intimacy in America, was really instrumental to my research. So this is Vanitas, Camden Ferry, and I have a series of Vanitas poems. Vanitas is a form of painting, a genre of painting that is sort of memento mori. A lot of skulls turn up, a lot of just reflections on mortality appear, or symbols of mortality appear in these types of paintings. So this is Vanitas, Camden Ferry. Leaning against the stern, working like a loom, its warp and weft churning toward a shore serrated by Camden's skyline and bounded by the dim figure of Walt Whitman Bridge, sphinx-like in the distance, stitched across the valley where the man came to rest. City Hall is a Confederate gray, the amphitheater's solemn lawn along a field of latticed asphalt, faint pulse of the aquarium dome, and Campbell's Field of Dreams honoring the fallen factory with its stead. Among these, the churchly tower abandoned by RCA Victor inverts anachronism with its stained glass backlit gold and green like tarnished brass. Nipper the dog, the Victrola, and his master's voice etched below. I turn to you, truant of old jurisdictions, sounding your fluid margins, my city of brotherly love. Your office buildings wrinkle like sequin gowns at sunset, jazzed by the river's brisk cologne. Your pen's landing is adrift with trumpet and ride cymbal, pleats of zydeco driven by instinct across the crease in the horn of my ear, taking the long canal down to where skull song turns physical, the music's ripples nudging my body's own timpani, feeding me across these waters once ferried by William Still, who'd bid adieu to fugitives bound for Ontario. And of course, William Still was on the Underground Railroad, right? Okay. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. So, reflecting on my strange upbringing, I was just a strange child. It has nothing to do with my upbringing. I blame it on whatever try and blame it on whatever I can. But sort of a way of getting back to this mid-'80s experience of South Jersey suburbia. This is suburban passional. Measured, I would tell the nation with my lips drawn and certain if a correspondent prompted me to describe the widow. As in, she measured evenings in the incense I watched ash like a fuse, and once imagined her body turned to silt wicked in bathwater. Yet puckering the sofa with elbows and heels, she sat listening to bitches brew. This the time I came collecting for the Courier, vertical blinds strobing my view of her through the rec room window, the bare and jewel-charmed ankle, the cable box and grape drink can. From the beveled shoulder in her boat neck blouse to the brass ashtray, my eyes riffled the blinds like a pack of cards and landed on a pack of Easy Widers. Don't think I didn't know what I was clocking. My father loved that album, and lately wild afternoons affecting postures of one kissed by the lotus. As I rang the bell, she emptied the earth-colored leather and chrome and crossed the room in Sergio Valente's. I swore allegiance to her that day, and no longer to the crew of boys on mopeds who lived at the end of our cul-de-sac. I knew something of devotion because my father made me recite the St. Crispin's Day speech whenever I misbehaved. Here I stood now on her porch, thinking, we few, we happy few, as I watched her hide the stash box in the bookshelf. And I thought of her husband who passed out athwart the leather of his '79 Eldorado, still idling in the spotless garage, home from the bar one night. She left the garage open for months afterward, and I felt guilty for secretly wishing my father dead instead of Mr. Calvin. And in the memory of that night, I included a news crew among the ambulance and police to distract my guilt by scandalizing the scene. I recall this as I glanced back at the cruiser just then passing as I stood waiting for her to answer the door. Next thought, fear. Not fear for safety, but the fear I sensed in men watching football. I had to figure passion as a form of fear, since fear was always shaken into cocktails of butterflies and bile, making it sublime, and so I sometimes wore an engine-red football helmet while riding my paper route. And because the sight from other senses must suffice when one goes blind with fear, as I did in those awkward test runs out to balance the admixture, I scraped the scabs of familiarity and deposits of routine associations from the streets I plied, and left the bare empirical frothing there in the sunlight like battery acid. I imagined myself cool as 5-0 behind Ray-Bans, and assumed the arrogance from whence I could dismiss what the theater of my absurd knew of itself. In my righteous alienation, I chuckled at the quaintness of it all. My new ignorance had inertia like the vices of men silhouetted in garages, and lifted me from my bike by the fascinations to lead me to an apprehension of details often wise unsung along these lawns edged like mint chocolate cake. Thus inspired, I told her I was sorry to disturb her, as I overheard the cop car grip the sun-softened blacktop like Velcro, treading around the bend. I said she was pretty. She tugged 2 bills from a wallet and watched me off as I haunted a Prince tune like a castrato down the drive beneath my helmet. And even now, I want to reach into the stanza the way she reached into her jeans to pay me. Reach in and take the rosining roach from her fingers to shotgun a beam of smoke across her polished bottom lip. Maybe kiss her like I'd never left home, afraid it wouldn't be there if I ever did return. So Georgia O'Keeffe, married to Alfred Stieglitz, who was friends with Jean Toomer. Jean Toomer is translating the work of the mystic philosopher George Gurdjieff. O'Keeffe is at their summer cottage in Lake George, recovering from a breakdown. Stieglitz tells Toomer, you can use our summer cottage to go work on these translations. Mayhem ensues. Quaint mayhem. Restoring O'Keeffe. Something of a cure lay in that rustic cottage, clear exhaust off Lake George, winter ticking intaglios across the pane, and Jean Toomer tapping on his underwood in the guest room upstairs. All week she shared with him her soups and the baskets arrived from New York, remarked the nub of the citrus fruit against his hesitating palm, his tawny, raceless hand. Whether he leaked Gurdjieff's freedom of love into the frond of her ear, or Georgia had the servant tincture a remedy with the herb used to seduce, she pulled together one night with a Calvados in the snifter like a handful of flame, and Santa Fe whistling through the mind like a desert train. Tawny earth and the ineluctable sky, she thought, though the window held a pallor of snow and moon crusted to the clearing beyond a grid of gaslight, cold hushing the cantor of Harlem, eliding his orbit with hers. You have a feminine soul, she said, pooling his face in her hands, measuring his eyes against a gray scale of sexuality. She held his head to her skirted hip. Cleft of peach, he said with his hands at the small of her back. And so I just wanted to share maybe 1 or 2 poems from the project I'm working on now. Yeah, 2 poems. And this is the working title of the new manuscript is Marginalia. And basically it's poems about literature. I'm a PhD student, so I just, rather than fight it, I'm trying to, steer into the storm and then, make use of the wind. So this first poem I'm going to read is, the title is Raisin, and it plays off of Lorraine Hansberry's Raisin in the Sun. Raisin. His son braces, as if wrapped by the sound of a roulette ball, tallying his chances of inheriting that kamikaze lust for validation. All or nothing in the boy's eyes, while Walter Lee waffles, uncertain of obsequity or rage, before Linder, who has offered to buy Walter's family out of the house they've purchased in the white suburb, ink wet on the contract, and provoked Walter's second consciousness, the one in which Walter wants to take the Ophase bread as reparations for the insurance money, his own father's legacy, lost on a humbug. Walter Lee wants to bargain his pride, but he's caught the falter in his son's eye. What would Diddy do, by the way? P. Diddy played Walter Lee in the Broadway version. So, what would Diddy do? Who has time to be raising kids in this man's country? The inflected verb we pronounce raisin, generations wimpling in succession like the raisins that sang Marvin's hit song. Outside the theater, my nephew tells me when Diddy was 2, they found his hustler dad slumped in a car in Central Park, a bullet in his head. I share what I know of cartoon raisins and Marvin Gaye and how the untrained love of men can fray, unravel, snap like stressed hemp, dropping random sandbags, drapes, and backdrops, light cans crashing on the very heads of those for whom we've set the stage. When asked if he loved his son, Marvin Sr. replied, "Let's just say I didn't dislike him." We each walk in silence through Times Square, alone together, exposed to the bling of many billion diodes, lure of the body electric that makes us compatriots and men. And finally, my aunt, so not the aunt who's the artist, but the aunt who likes to hang out in Atlantic City, sent me mistakenly, I'm assuming mistakenly, but she sent me a picture by email. The title was simply AC Pimp. There's a picture of the guy. So sort of reflecting on that whole dynamic. I'm assuming she meant it for my father, I'm a junior. Attachment, Atlantic City Pimp. Left of the circle A, the address was ethnically gendered. Sista instead of sister, which I scoffed at before registering it was my aunt who sent the JPEG from her BlackBerry. The subject line read AC Pimp, as if my aunt were expert in the fauna, savant of things cold-blooded, of sharkskin and the catalog of aliases from Baltimore to Detroit and points crisscrossing the Lackawanna line. As if she could divine an ivory-handled derringer holstered at his breast, icing his inner bone-clad suffer puppet, cognate to the gun, the one I know as brick red and blue, perhaps addled by some amphetamine and pumping madly against life's dirty furniture, recycling the residue of hurt that surfaces like a bruise dealt with every spaghetti-strapped back answer and doubt. She must have thought she'd reached her brother, my namesake, who harbors like a gold molar a taste for robin egg and mauve pocket squares, aubergine and lavender socks, lapels check-striped and foreshortened like Tyrannosaurus arms, and ostrich print Stacey Adams to match. The derby feathered modestly in contrast to all those boas festooning street lamps and mailboxes. The world anatomized atop the pimp's marble cane, his crystal ball speckled the hood with of a dash-carpeted brougham with diamond light from the collar of his pet ocelot. But my aunt is no such expert. The city in the subject line, like the city itself, ultimately cosmetic, while the word pimp signifies as lightly as the word vermouth whispered over gin, such derision as she encoded in the photo, the currency of our vengeance economy. A critique like a razor inside a roll of 20s. I'm sure there was an untroubled sea just beyond the casinos behind him, ambling silhouettes obscured in the moody flux where a horizon should be, the smothered sound of waves so relentless one would barely care to notice. Thank you. Oh, yes. That would be nice, right?
To Greg Pardlo for his next poet is Gabriel Welsch. Gabriel Welsch is magazines and journals, including Harvard Review, New Letters, the Spoon River Poetry Review, the Crab Orchard Review, Georgia Review, Ascent, Missouri Review, American Literary Review, and the Mid-American Review. 2003, he received the Pennsylvania Arts Council Individual Artist Fellowship for Fiction, and in 2002 was the inaugural Thoreau Poet in Residence at the Toledo Botanical Garden. His first collection of poetry, Dirt and All of Its Dense Labor, was published by Weird Editions in 2006. He currently lives in Pennsylvania with his wife and daughter, where he is the Assistant Vice President of Marketing at Juniata College.
Good pronunciation. You got that right. Thanks, Zach. Thanks to Greg for that reading. And the first poem I'm going to read from the book is I'm going to dedicate to Matt, our host. Thank you both for inviting us up here and for doing this project that has really been amazing. I mean, I remember when it was you and I and a dozen other people maybe on the site, and now it's, what, 200? Something like that? 200? Yeah, closing in on it. So it's amazing. And so I'm dedicating this one to him because of its theme. It's called Watershed, and you'll catch the theme. And it's because Matt drives a car powered by vegetable oil, fry oil. So this one's for you. This is called Watershed, and you're helping to preserve the watershed. It begins with an epigraph from Elizabeth Bishop's poem titled Poem. And the epigraph is, "The little we get for free, the little of our earthly trust, not much." Wine bottles in recycle bins all down the block glint the last light of a dry June evening. A Sunday. Make deep shadows in the new grass, a peony, a splayed burst of another light glowing in northern rooms. As the cool descends with maple seeds and the street rests, yards quiet and dense with grill heat and early honeysuckle lining the stream at the hill's bottom. The stream runs southeast behind an auto body shop, a printer, out beneath a laureled ridge and on past Dublin and rising sun to a confluence of streams from Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, into the slow Chesapeake, its snails and curvaceous clams, its silted bottom and illusory green, the true exotic, so far from here, from the coiled hose, the mailbox flag, the forsythia clutched in English ivy, the tuft of clipped grass, the soapy husks of lather left in the driveways where we washed cars, far, far from ease, from these rooms now clasped in evening. And the next three poems will be the Death Trio. I have a friend who's a poet, Robin Becker, and one of her poems ends with a student jumping up and shouting, "That's all you poets write about is death." So, as you said, embrace it. Don't try to fight it, you know. And so these next three are on that topic. Well, when you're a gardener, you face it all the time. So this one, the botanical name for yews, those green boxy things in front of houses, is taxus. And so if you take the theme and my inability to resist puns, you get the title of this poem. It's Death and Taxus. Yews are old. In graveyards they tent over the dead, their berries blood-heavy, blackening stones. In our suburbs they crouch as battlements in front of ranches and bungalows, whispering, "Eisenhower." Their botanical call is the drumbeat of perpetuity. Taxus baccata baccata, taxus ripandens, the beat for the oarsman to stroke over sticks, the stone in the prow, his face like the pit of yew-berries. Taxus, taxus, take from us our light, the tilth of our soil, our fears, our house fronts, our sorrow. Make it green. And as has been implied thus far, I'm a gardener. For years I was a landscaper. And that doesn't have anything to do with the picture on the front of the book. Those are my father-in-law's feet. That's the question that usually comes at the end of the reading, so I'll just address it now. Those are my father-in-law's feet. This next poem is called Epitaph. It's after W.S. Merwin, who will come in later. The winters I passed hours in ice light, hearing the melt through the roof, the sky in its milky cup pressed star distant, and I cradled days of quiet. Springs I trod the green's insistence, tasting soil as though it weren't ancient and simply repeated in new inflorescence, nearby as knees and damp while I sowed what I remembered. Summers I breathed in sheets of light warmed with cricket screams and bees, leaves a shambling deep gloss, toothsome and handsome, and I bundled their scents to me to remember. Autumns I hoped through leaf-spiced twilight against the gilded glisten of limbs, cold firmament a cloud-thick distance, wind buoying the seeds on a breeze to drop them to soil and a bedding of quiet. It's going to cost a lot to put that on a stone. This next one's called Worm Food. I let my syllables compost, know the company of worms. I want them rich with grub innards, to take food from the gullet walls of night crawlers. And if filled with soil, a night crawler, were broken in two underfoot, let those ends burrow under roots, evade moles, wiggle until it rains, and they resurface far from asphalt, under the high-ribbed leaves of heaven, to greet the mist as if it were new. For years, well, for 3 years, I guess, I worked in a garden center. I was the manager of the nursery. I bought the plants and so forth. And at the time, I lived in apartments and so didn't have my own garden. And so for a long time, I was giving people garden advice. It was strictly theoretical. I was like a critic. And I always felt like a fraud telling them, oh, yeah, you cut them back this way and you do that. And never having, tended my own garden. And boy, do you learn a lot when you're your own plot of land. You're like, yeah, okay. A lot of that stuff I used to dispense was, well, manure, castings, fertilizer. So, and everything is so tidy in the gardening world until you get your own. And they send you garden porn, like the catalogs with the seeds and the beautiful gardens. And so this poem was written, it was a thought that I had for a long time, and one day I decided to write it down. And it's called A Plantsman's Confession. And it begins with a folk proverb that you've heard in various ways, but this one is, the plumber's sink is always clogged. A Plantsman's Confession. Those squatters, swarthy green on my windowsill, wilt and twist, buckle at their pot rims. With miserly watering, peace lily, pothos, and devil's ivy evolve to subsist on neglect. Dust, lined like a dry riverbed, mottles and cakes the leaves, and the tendrils of peace lily slouch, long withered, their veins dark and prominent in the aged tan, like the whorled innards of a walnut. What leaves remain on the umbrella tree spread undecided, torn between sun at the window, shadows of the side yard, veiled solitude of the ceiling. The spider mites weave boudoirs at the crotches of stems and trunk. I see the pathogenic blight. Though I can advise gardeners on tomatoes' real desires, on lusher azaleas, on weed control, on exactly what Gypsophila paniculata has to do with limestone, my window tells the true story of my work. I toast the weeds in my unmulched beds, contradictions to all my advice to garden customers. They don't know I look forward to the drape of sweetgrass, to the splay of a thistle bloom. So don't trust me if I give you garden advice. Well, you can trust me now, actually. So this next one is called Pause. And you think, I've had the book for a while. You think I know where this stuff is. Okay. This is an imitation of Frank O'Hara. It's you can pretend that you don't hear the voices of other folks, or you can just admit it. And so the names of other poets are all through here because it's like, yeah, I read some O'Hara and then wanted to try it badly. So this is called Pause. If I am given a moment, time plucked from a day, I might wash in the thick cloth of petunia fragrance, or iris musk, mull over mud and let my tongue empty through my teeth, loose the words I would never say, conversations fat and imagined that clog my throat on purple days. I'll stare at windows, guess at the thickness of light resting on the glass pushing out from inside. Take the time inside this poem and grow a fruit of rest. Let ideas marinate in the spice of yew needles dying, pressing at the breeze, their smell on a cold night near limbed streets, insisting that the dark hides nothing that doesn't want to be hidden. And I wasn't originally going to read this next one, but the Philadelphia Camden poem was just like, got me fired up, so I want to play too. This is the opening poem of the book, and it's a scene-setting piece, I guess, and it's called Pennsylvania. It's my home state. I lived most of my life there. I lived in all different parts of it, and it's after Elizabeth Bishop. Elizabeth Bishop once wrote a poem called Florida, in which, in the first line, she insists that Florida is the state with the prettiest name. And, some would say Maine. Others would say, other states. But this is the one that I felt like taking up that challenge. And if people know Bishop's poem on Florida, there's this menacing alligator presence in it. And so I'm like, well, in Pennsylvania we have menacing deer. Yeah, Nittany lions. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so I worked with that idea and came up with this. This is Pennsylvania after Bishop. The state with the prettiest name in the ear of an ancient ridge, its runnel of stone cluttered with the wet trees that hold taut the devastating brown in winter. The state with air cluttered by the noise of more miles of road than any other state, its cities rarefied by steel and freedom. The state of deer hungry and baffled, twisted on its roads, tufted on its fenders, swinging husks on the porches of tight homes crowded on the Susquehanna, the Juniata, the Allegheny. The state where roads of chicory rattle through the weight of August out of the mountains and onto the slow limestone slab that runs to the Chesapeake. The state hollowed out in its wood-dense middle, rusted in a line from Scranton to Monroeville. Slag heaps stand sentry over ridges pillaged bald. The state on fire at its core, where stories slide into the maw of hell each time another house groans its way into the earth. The state abutting the Great Lakes, which feels their force with each gush of winter that rakes over the ridges. The state where mud sings, its telepathy gritty and familiar, its voice a particular shade of its character given roundness with sweet lime. The state of forests that beckon with trails of shadow and distance and great disappearance, tied to its deliberate stretch toward winter, when this state is all smoke and the gray reaches of trees, all darkness and fire, all ash and water and the salt-worn roads that lead all thoughts to home. The state where to talk of soup is to talk of God and Sunday bundling and bazaars through the countryside and gravestones laid over with flags and wax begonias. The state with pierogi sales and funnel cakes and cheesesteaks and soft pretzels and the ruddy faces of corpulent railroaders. The state that is everywhere and here, made distinct by its bunched mountains and hidden towns, how it lays demolished under leaves resting on ground that grows hollow and more hollow year after year, burning and sinking. The state with the prettiest name, a name that is both lie and promise, adjective and mystery, history and fable of one man's woods. We hear robins in the laurel, semis Jake breaking into town, the sudden snap of deer hooves on tomato steaks, and always highways building and seething with our weight, pushing on limestone, building and building on this softening ground. This is one inspired by my daughter. She's 6. Full moon, January thaw. Evenings like this promise false springs as the moon waxes in its fog-sodded corona. When the seasons mix, our time folds forward on itself, that we might step into memories unmade, early anniversaries, earth-scented recollections. Bella, still a stranger to the lushness of language, may not yet know the days grow, instead senses their length, remembers what she can about time and weather, her instincts perhaps less befuddled than our informed ideas about time's arrangement with the seasons. She might feel air more dense with light, rich with predictions of rain. She might feel in the ground sigh a tuft of grass. I wonder at her world, her sense at last. Speaking of children, killing bees. Building on the environment theme, and sometimes the environment runs up against being a dad. And this story is based on a friend I know who told me, and so it's not actually my neighbor, but for purposes of narrative, it is. Killing bees. Finding carpenter bees in decking, my neighbor tries to balance his love of all creatures with the buzzing destruction of his home. He tells me he decided to coexist at first, wondering just how much damage can bugs really do. Months later, when he sees inside the hollowed beams above his porch and feels the soft push of the wood yield to a finger poke, he hears the roof crashing around one of his kids. He runs to Walmart, a place he detests, and fills a green basket with can after can of killing spray, and that evening enacts an orgy of chemical death. Clouds of it. A stink like lighter fluid spiked with lemon. He blinks at the haze. His hand goes to his mouth again and again. His children watch him cough, and they crack the door. His daughter wants to help. He yells at her to get back. Startled, she hits her head as she backs up. His son starts to whimper. The haze thickens and catches the hue of sunset. His wife yells to hurry up and slams the door. A bee staggers along the beam. He wants to crush it with his thumb, his tongue, to taste it die, to make it pay for every hurt, to sting back for his eyes, his house, his place, to protect the eyes he sees now, wet behind the glass doors, the eyes that will want to look to him forever. That's what this book is like. My next project is a book right now tentatively called The Four Horsepersons of a Disappointing Apocalypse. And it started with a character, this telemarketer, who, if anybody's been to this site, there's some telemarketer poems on there, and it's a telemarketer who's making her calls, and one day she starts calling poets, both alive and dead, and getting various results. And so that's where this all started. And so I'll read you a couple of those to give you a flavor of what that's like. And here's where W.S. Merwin comes back in. The telemarketer calls the Merwin household. The lines here, in some cases, well, in the Merwin poem, none of them are from Merwin, but in some of them, there's a Stevens line here or there, or there's a Billy Collins, whatever. But in this one, these are all me imitating Merwin. The telemarketer calls the Merwin household. If you have a few minutes, sir, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Wave to me your fires, they are nothing. This call may be recorded for quality assurance. The moss burns lightless as snow. Okay. Is there a DVD player anywhere in the residence? The machine gurgles its greed through the forest, a great walker. So, yes? No. What is the approximate age of the oldest member of the household? Ash and ash and ash again, its thickness, its rope, its milk. You should hear the guy I have on the line here. I can hear you. I'm having a hard time with your answers, sir. I can hear you. I heard you. You do not hear. I just don't understand. Don't understand what you're, saying. I mean, I understand the words, like individually, but when I put them together, I just don't get them. I don't grasp your meaning. The dark rooms invent a new twilight, rancid with sweat, the mist of the forest, here clouds, and all about the whiff of the humid, the dense. This is my job, I don't need this shit. It is your job and it is mine, and this role's less decadent than any words you know. Repeat it again and again to yourself, the sound repeating again. Promise yourself that you will work to understand what you cannot yet hear. Whatever. I assume you will be on our don't call list. Of course I will, but only because you decided the call hopes sings. This all started because I was working on a project on Merwin, and I got a call from a telemarketer. And of course it did, don't put me on your call last night, And I thought, I'm sure that there are others who handle this better than I do. So, the next one, what happens is she keeps calling them and she keeps getting more and more frustrated, right? Because wouldn't you? You're trying to do your work and you're being heckled by people who are wordy. And so, in one of the later ones, you begin to learn more about her life. And so in this one, the telemarketer means to call Baker about erectile dysfunction, but in a misdial winds up with Simich. Yeah. Good evening, sir. I'm calling you because you asked for more information about our product, Regita, the natural erectile enhancement. I didn't do that. Is this Mr. Baker? I should have asked that right away. So you're not Mr. Baker? No. Who are you? Well, that's not really, important. I know who you are. If you're not Mr. Baker, we can just... You live in 2 rooms from which you've pawned pictures. Their shapes ghost your walls, outlines hanging with no weight. How do you... Your laundry seethes at the door, glasses fill with spider webs. You clutch at your eyes sometimes to remove migraines, to pull them through your brow like tapeworms. Who are you? Sunny Thursdays, your days off. You pace off the river's bend in the smell of toast and eggs, the fry cook's blind sizzle, a shadow scratching your hands. You wonder where your husband walks in the daylight, his face euphoric as a clock. Weeping, glassine tufts of woe. You know the taste of air here, don't you? Sugared with all you lack. Do the signposts long for clean sheets? Do the storm grates cough up sweet rinds? Stop seeing what I see. Yours is a job for pilot. Late in life, after the crust of empire is sloughed off, when the oranges fold in on themselves, weighted with gutter frost. Pilot would only call in the wee hours when doubt and fear avoid one another in the old hotel, splashing their faces with gray water, hands on a chipped sink as they yearn for the other. You have too dim a view of what I do, or the why of it, that sullen story. Tell me someone who has a rosy view, and I'll show you the nail through their foot. Okay, but who's holding the hammer? The phone on my card table, how its legs shake, how the night rots like food at a wake. When the phone rings and it is you, the old man meet in the hall, faces wet with all they'd wash away, and in the echo of ringing, joy creeps under the door. After the Simich one, she gets a little bit unhappy. And you learn that her husband ignores her, she's unhappy with her job, and so forth. Then you learn, through the book, that she is being admired from afar by the paperclip salesperson who lives in her building. And so these poems are in the section called The Paperclip Salesperson Tells All. This one's entitled The Annoying Questions at Parties. Keep in mind this is paperclip salesperson. Yes, there are people who sell just paperclips. No, I do not travel around in a paperclip van from office to office. I don't have a little tray like the candy and cigarette girls used to wear in theaters. I deal with stores, orders, office complexes, large scale, not retail. Usually in the tens of thousands. Oh yes, it's the most ridiculously exciting job in the world. What I always wanted to do. Isn't your job like that? Well, I guess I prefer Staples, but I don't think about it. Why is this so goddamn funny to you? Not really. I do have a degree, though. History, yeah. A liberal arts education is good for this. As soon as I get a wife, I'll let you know her thoughts on it, but just so you know, I won't really be with somebody who cares that much about what I sell or how. Oh, yeah, I sent a notice to the alumni magazine, took out an ad in the paper, too, just like realtors do. I got bags of mail for weeks. Oh, of course not. Virgo. In color, yes, I guess, but I seldom remember them. No, never about paperclips. Do you dream about law? Wait, don't tell me. Computers have actually made our business soar. They can't get past deadbolts, but I understand their hell on diary hash blocks. Right here in the United States. So, you meet him. And then the paperclip salesperson tells all. When I tell people they remind me of women, they laugh, especially men. Right, holding tight, clingy, clipped, needy, haw, haw, haw. That's not it at all. I nod, yes, reassure the smiles cut into their faces. Turn back to the comfort of the computer's quiet. They bend, you see. They curve. They are strong and smooth, can twist to do more than it seems they can. And I can hold them, but they still slip, click and shuffle into boxes. Funny how they all look the same and how I try to bend like them. He has a name. William Holtell is a name in a yearbook with grease, press box, strategy, hamburgers. 4 words should not stay with you. Or one. None, really. Like bad tattoos, torn bumper stickers. How you do one thing and it gloms onto you, flypaper deeds, and you sticky with your past. One thing, grease, Kaniki, and you're someone's leather memory. Eat burgers because your dad says bulk up and you're ground meat. You're small, so only the press box's number glory for you. No wonder reunions die. Only the teenage stars felt good enough to stay in town and watch it age and shift. They felt cocky enough to stay and fail. But what's your story? Misery compelled you to stay for the modest accident of your life? The woman next door pawned all of her furniture one winter, mad with grief and rage at the husband who one day evaporated. You spent months considering the light at her door, The ochres and burnt hues under the crack, wondering why she didn't pawn the lights, wondering what she did in the well-lit silence of that empty space, until you realized one day she wondered perhaps about you and the regimented hours you keep for the purpose of routine's bulwark against nothing, or why, every day it seemed, she smells fried meat, onions, the recycle bin and its weekly thrust of a ketchup bottle, folds of sports pages, trash, a sign of what remains. There's more to come on that. So, that's just a taste of it. I'll read you one last one from the book. It's called Preserves. It's from my wife, Jill. Mainly because it is her work that inspired it. Where is it? Here it is. We used to live in a small town in Pennsylvania called Milesburg. It used to be an industrial town. It's now basically an exit in the turnpike that holds a truck stop, and it's a bedroom community for State College, Pennsylvania. I no longer have this garden, but it takes place in the garden that was in that house. This is called Preserves. I cut back my shriveled garden this November, all fruits gone, leaves frost-crunched but fragrant with the last stores of water rising to the snipped stems. In other yards, scarfed gardeners bundle stakes, cast neat squares with winter rye, are soundless but for movement, harvest long plucked like the mills and jobs that built these homes. They snug potatoes for winter, firm the mounds over onions, while I cut back the odd ornament of roses, lady's mantle, thyme, and lavender. Through these softened appellations, western Pennsylvania towns crouch half hollow, Main Street a straight shot to foundries and old rails bleeding rust into the gravel, scrub dead grass and bent underbrush by the turnpike. People here wrinkle against the cold. They still can put up food, cure meat, hunt, and hold church bake sales, dances, festivals, card games. They keep shelves of pillowy pears, firmed apple butter, cabbage pressed to glass, and tomatoes glistening with stymied sun. On these coldest days, snow is like dust, twisting glass ghosting along salt-routed pavement and stretches of potholes. The windows of downtown darken with emptiness so deep I see the back walls of former stores. Farm fences mimic hillocks at sight's edge, where the sky is opaque milk-crusted dry, and I see only the slow steps of people in the fog, gray as ghostly poplar trunks, hunched shadows heavier than the cold's pale or the wind-worn stone of storefronts. On those days I understand their pantry shelves and why my wife wicks summer into a ball jar. We want to smell the work of summer's earth, our home when green and warm. I crouched one day last August and pruned the shrubby lavender stems pouched in blue, stripped the stems and packed the buds in a jar with alcohol gurgling deep. We left the jar for months in our tight pantry, among artichoke hearts and olives, keeping it like food. This winter, amid the buffeting brown and gray, dulled by the dour churches and salt scud, wrinkled truck drivers and breaths smoked with cold, I opened the jar, and the smell spilled out, spicy thick and vibrant as the day I picked it, drenched in alcohol that normally kills, preserving an essence of light, an essence like light captured in silver, a photograph of a smell. The foreign musk mingled with steel, the rot of frost kill, canning steam, and the whiff of stored cabbage, all sharpened by cold. Thank you.